Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. This is episode number 112. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined today by a very special guest, someone I'm very pleased to see, someone who knows how much I like him because I just spent 5 minutes talking to him before the show. Usually I like to roll right into these, keep it as fresh as possible. But when you see someone that you haven't seen in a while, you really want to talk to them. You give them a few minutes. So Jono Pech, my good friend, how are you today? Welcome.
Fantastic, Colin. Thanks for having me back. Thanks for the 5 minutes. And it's good to see you trusting the FBI enough to use your webcam finally. I don't know what's changed in your life, but this is like our fourth podcast together, and it's always been like on your phone camera until now.
Yeah. It's so I'm pointing at it here. Dustin finally, so I guess he was here November last year, and when we were preparing to do video podcasts, which we haven't discussed yet and publicly. And so we must have not been together since that point, because that's when I had no more excuses.
Right.
I broke my last laptop. I have a new laptop now, but I broke my last laptop's camera so badly with like software, like just messing with it, that it like I didn't know how to even find it anymore, like to, as like an active camera, because it's the one that was built in. So, well, it's good to see you anyway, and I'm sorry about that. I'm out of my reclusive state now.
That's great. It steps forward, Colin. It's good to see.
Yeah, it is. And so you're obviously down in Australia now. I did the math. It's, if I'm correct, it's February right now, right, in Australia.
Yeah, it's 2016 over here.
Yeah, it's crazy how that works, but it's I'm saying that just because I know it's very early in the morning for you, so I appreciate your time as well.
It's fine. I've got my coffee. Regard. We're all good.
Good, very well. And also, congratulations on the birth of your child. I just wanted to say that as well.
Thanks.
And how is that going? Is it exciting?
Yeah, he's now. He's almost 2 years old now, but time flies.
No, I thought he just turned 1.
Yeah, he turned 1 on December. In December. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'm a little late. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's nice.
Well, how is fatherhood? We were just talking about. Well, is your child's name public?
We can. It's Micah, so we can say that.
Yeah, I didn't know if, because some people. Yeah, I've known people that don't say anything. But I was just gonna say. The reason that came up, and I guess I thought it was a little more recent, was because you had brought up, I don't know if you remember the name of my child, and I was like, I didn't. You had said Micah, and obviously the reference is biblical, but I was joking that perhaps the reference is actually for my girlfriend Micah, which would have been really nice, and also kind of time travel when you really consider it. It would have. We only started dating about a year, and well, I thought it was in the window, but it really doesn't make any sense anymore. All right, Jono, I wanted to bring you on today. I was actually writing. I don't often do this, but I was writing the description for our show. So for people that don't know, what ends up happening is, I'm sorry, I'm sweating like a whore in church again. It just worked out. I don't know why I always do this. So I send Dustin like just a quick thing, number, whatever, the name of the show, and a write-up, right? And I don't typically write them beforehand, but I actually started writing yours because I was trying to explain to the audience why I wanted to do an episode of the show, other than the fact that I like you. I like the developer Rainbite, and I wanted to talk about it. And I used the word, and I think I said this to you in a DM to you. I found it quite charming, and I wanted to talk to you specifically about the act of writing the game and the game's story, because it's nice to be able to talk to someone that kind of has similar experiences to what I've just experienced. Like, you're no more or less experienced at this than me now.
That's right.
And so I think we both kind of figured out what we were doing without, I don't know, I can't speak for you, but I didn't have any guidance on what I was supposed to do, or how to write something, or how to put it together, and how to present it, and how to edit it, and how to patch it, and whatever the case might be. So I started writing that down, and I realized that there were like manifold reasons why I really wanted to talk to you today. So first of all, I wanted to congratulate you. It's a great game.
Thanks.
Trigger Witch is available now on PS4 and elsewhere, Xbox One, PC, Switch.
Not PC yet, but...
Oh, I'm sorry, not PC. I'm looking at the Steam page now, but I guess it isn't. Yeah, I guess it's, what is it? Oh, this is Steam. What the hell is this? Steam-games.org.
I guess it's a gaming website that wants
I'll go to
people
East
to.
Asia Soft instead. Here we go.
Wants,
So also available. It's available natively on PS5 as well. I must have played it there.
the PS5
Did I
update
play
is
it there?
coming later this year.
Okay, cool. And so that will be a similar. Will that be a thing like where it'll be available as like a new download for free with a new trophy list and all the
Yeah,
rest?
I don't know if it's free. I haven't got that information. I hope it is,
Mm.
but there's a physical version that Play Asia will be distributing. So that's the PS5 one, and there's a Switch physical. So that's coming later. The update hasn't been finalized, but it will have a new trophy list. It'll have adaptive triggers and 120 refresh rate and all the good stuff that you want from your PS5 pixel art games. People like,
Yeah,
how is this game going to be on PS5? Like really pushing the PS5 to its capacity here. But hey,
I've been thinking about that too with the games we make, where I'm like, what can we do? Can we do something outrageous, like make it run at like some absurd, unnecessary frame rate, and say, here's how it went. You know, the PS5 version has a 300 frames per second. It can't even define it with the human eye. You need some sort of counter in the corner.
It's a good gimmick.
Because I'm the same way. We don't need the power anymore. I think our games could run on older hardware. But what was it like to write this game? And I'm kind of curious how you encountered these guys to begin with. Rainbite existed. They did their own game. It's actually kind of similar. I mean, that's what's so funny about the situation. I'm going on and on, but it's similar to us.
Yeah, it is.
Here, where like a studio existed, then I found my way to the studio. I know you're in more of a freelance capacity with them.
Yeah.
I seized control of the operation. So we took a different sort of tack. But how did you find these guys? And tell me a little bit about the genesis of this game.
Sure. So there are a lot of similarities to you and Barry, because I did encounter these guys for my podcast originally, Putting in Work, which Colin and Dagan and Chris and Dustin and Ben have all been guests on in the past. And so Reverie came out. It's a game, like a Zelda-like game set in New Zealand, which appealed to me, being just across the ocean there. And I reached out to them and invited two of the 3 devs onto my podcast to talk about the game. Hit it off with Jared, especially the lead programmer. We played a lot of games together, played through like the Division 2 quite a bit together, and became good friends over our shared interests. And I loved just picking his brain as like a developer to get his take on the games that we were playing together or things in the industry. And because, as you know, I'd written 2 novels prior to this, I put it out there that, hey, next time you guys are putting a game out, let me edit the script. Because Reverie had dialogue, it had NPCs and a bit of a story. It wasn't anything close to the depth that Trigger Witch has. But he was like, yeah, that sounds good, and I'll run it by the rest of the guys. And then some time passed, some months indeed, and Trigger Witch was revealed at the kind of funny indie showcase. And by that point, or maybe it was a bit after the timeline, you know, COVID's just kind of ruined my memory, but
Yes.
I didn't have COVID. It's not a side effect.
You don't have long COVID? No, I understand what you mean.
You know
it's
what I
a
mean.
time warp. Totally.
Yeah, especially because of my job. Anyway, I work in healthcare, and it's kind of like just everything. But anyway, at some point, he said, "Do you just want to write the whole game?" And of course, I said yes, because writing a video game has been something that I'd love to do for a long time. So that's how I got into it, was by essentially having friends that were indie developers that they all went to school for programming. They all took different tasks within the game, including the art and the game design and everything. So writing wasn't one of their core skills, and being able to come in with that background that I have as a journalist and an author meant that I could inject so much more into it than what they had the time and natural skill to do, I guess.
It's awesome. Like I want to get into the story a little in a more deep and specific way a little later. I'll keep it spoiler free for the time being, and I'll make sure to note that in the description so people know they can listen for at least a little while. But I've been fascinated by you for a while because you work, like you said, you work a day job. You're married. You have a child who's, you said, turned 1 in December, so 20 months old or something like that. So that's a handful. I'm sure you have other tasks at hand. And I was fascinated by you in the beginning because you wrote these 2 books. and I don't understand how you find the time to do it, because I guess I'm a little too judgmental of myself, but I found it really hard to find the time, and still do have a really hard time finding the time. I think about what I'm going to write for so long before I write it, because I only have like this. I just can't find in my mind. I just can't find the time, and I'm amazed at what a maestro of time management you absolutely must be. So I'm curious, just from that utilitarian kind of angle, like what is how do you function in life? Like, what is your life like,
Yeah.
that you're able to be creative, and the spontaneity that comes along with that, while also manage all these other things in your life? I feel like I need to sit and listen about this specifically.
That's an interesting question. I guess I always, well, especially since I started my first book in 2016, or yeah, I've always wanted to fill my time, my free time, with something that feels like I'm creating something. You know, I was a journalist for so long, and I think when I was in news journalism, that was my outlet to putting something out into the world. And once I ended that and went into public relations, kind of like behind the scenes, I felt a little bit like there was something missing. And I probably talked about this on our fireside chat, but you know, I was working at a political office, and it wasn't rewarding me. I wasn't getting to write in the way that I was used to. So that's when I started writing my first book. As far as like, where do I find the time? It's the same thing. Like when you know, we were expecting, and before my son was born, some people, especially people that don't really understand how gamers are, they're like, "You're not going to have any time for video games once the kid's here." And I was like, "We'll see." And lo and behold, I still have a lot of time for games. You know, people have to sleep. There's other people in my house that, you know, once they're in bed, it's my time. You know, you can't
Right.
take that away from me. I'm not going to like start going to bed at 8 o'clock just because I have a kid. And that's really like, so that's when I find time to play games, but it's also when I find time to edit my podcast and to get deep into the weeds on writing or doing the sound design on a game like Trigger Witch. And I think like the difference between what you said before and me perhaps is that I don't need to get in the zone for any of this stuff. I can just snap into it instantly. So the book, for example, I used to write parts of it when I was on the bus going to work, or walking around town in my lunch break, or, you know, I just have an idea and I just hammer out like a few lines of dialogue. So I think being able to snap in and out of it at will almost is perhaps what makes it possible to find time to just chip away.
Yeah, you seem to be more on the edge of, like, on the spectrum of writing.
On the spectrum, maybe.
On the spectrum generally. We can talk about where you are on that spectrum, which probably be in a different place, but uh, but on the spectrum of like being able to write a lot, I guess, to being able to write a little or nothing at all. I'm more like Salinger, and you're more like King, where I need to, and that's not an insult on the quality. In fact, I don't really like JD Salinger very much. I find him very fascinating, but just in the fact that he kind of wrote one or two things, couldn't really find the time, wanted to be reclusive. And it goes into the old joke about writing, that like writers spend all their time not writing. It's like amazing how much writers do not write. And I've found that to be true about myself. I just think and think and think and think about ideas until I can finally hammer them out. And I was so impressed with your ability to flesh Trigger Witch out that candidly we started having a conversation, which I want to continue with you, about you helping me write my like our role playing games. Like I don't know if I can. I don't even know. I probably could do it, but I just don't know if I'm going to be able to do it to the degree that someone who can find the time, has the space, the ability, and all of that to do it. So just from that standpoint, I find that impressive, because I've been around creative people my whole life, and there aren't many people like that you know can really like create. You know, maybe in a newsroom, but not, you know.
I think that might, I think that the news background might really be a big factor of it, because I love working to deadlines. And if someone tells me that I have to finish something in 3 days, I'll often just want to finish it today. Like that's just naturally how I am. And
were you like that in school?
I don't remember high school so much having those longer deadlines, but at university or college, I definitely was. You know, I've got an assignment due in 2 weeks. It's 2,000 words. So, you know, I have to do this many words every day to have it done. and
Wow,
inevitably,
yeah.
inevitably, I would write more than I needed to, so I'd end up finishing it like 3 or 4 days early, and had that time to breathe and edit and relax and print it and
Right.
submit it. So I guess I've
Yeah.
been like
Speaking
that
of
for a while.
that, speaking of that other spectrum, I guess now but I think this is I was a similar way when I was in college too, because I was so maybe we're OCD in different ways where I really tended towards the syllabus, like that style of they'd always warn you in high school, and maybe you had a few classes like this. I did too, where it's like we're gonna run it like a college class, and you're. I remember being told over and over again, like your professor doesn't give a fuck about you. Is basically like the message I got when I was in high school, and then so I became so scared that I would get things done early. But I think when I can set my own schedule, it's a little bit different for me. But
Yeah,
I also wonder if part of your productivity, like you're up early in the morning. I thanked you for that earlier. I would never be able to do something like that.
not
Uh,
that early.
and and it's what was it like eight or nine
Yeah,
in the
it's like
morning?
almost 9 o'clock now. Yeah.
I mean, that's completely
Okay.
unthinkable for me. But I mean, unless I absolutely have to, like the builders were like in my
Yeah.
house at like 7:30 in the morning the other week, and I'm like, oh, this sucks. But I wonder if part of it is also that you'll because you're in Australia and interact so much with the rest of the world that you kind of have to be a little more rigorous with your timeline as well. I wonder if that's sunk in too, and I've just never had to deal with that
Mm.
so much, but a little bit with Japan, I guess, but not so much. But anyway, I'm rambling. I want to get into the embryo of what this story is.
Sure.
You had told me something surprising, which was well, not surprising to me. Maybe people would be curious about this too, which was you. I guess I was complimenting you on the way what happens in the game. We'll get into that in a little while. And you were saying, well, there was an idea
Yeah.
that already existed for this, and that really hit with me too, because that is not Twinbreaker. I wrote that from the ground up, but Habroxia 2 did have an idea. So what was it like to take someone else's kind of little nugget, little seed,
Mm.
and help sprout it? Because I assume that I felt a lot of pressure doing that with Habroxia too, because you want to make sure to kind of reach the level, the expectations of the person who kind of
Yeah.
came up with the, let's call it the IP.
Sure. I really enjoyed that because I think a lot of the time for me the hardest part is coming up with a great concept or a great idea that hasn't been done. That's if you sit here and we could think about it for 10 minutes and throw ideas at each other, and the chances are it's something that you've heard before or someone else has done something similar. So when they came to me and said this is the basic story, I was like, okay, like can't think of any games that I've played or any movies I've seen or TV shows that have anything like this. Really, like a portal that throws guns into a fantasy world for starters in itself. That's I guess the elevator pitch, Zelda with guns, and that was something that was completely new to me. And yeah, there is the twist later in the game that I definitely wouldn't have come up with myself. So the fact that this was laid out for me, it almost took the pressure off making it interesting. Like that was just going to happen naturally because of the concept being so fascinating. So from there, it was almost, I've used the analogy. It was like I just had to connect the dots and then color in the picture, so to speak, because the bones were already there, and I just had to kind of flesh it out.
Yeah, I assume it's what because I'm trying to write the Bible to the game that we're working on
Mm.
now. And it's slow going. It's just like a bunch of fucking notes in a legal pad, basically. But I imagine it's like being in a writer's room for a game, for a TV show or something, or where it's more of a collaborative project, and that is more normal. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
like you, I come from a more technical. Well, I come from a technical writing and then a news background, and we're not used to too many collaborations. They happen, big breaking news and stuff like that. So that might be part of it as well, where you were able to kind of dive in and flesh this out. And I agree that Reverie was so good, and I think what it was missing was taking full advantage of that world that they built, which was awesome. Like there wasn't enough interactivity with it. I was done with it too quick. I didn't
Mm.
feel like it needed too much more because I was really quite in love with it. But I was glad to see that extra panache. And so, what about? Talk to me a little bit about the characters and kind of the I guess your ability to come up with these, or did these characters already exist too, in addition to the
Yeah.
twist?
So initially, they had Colette established. They had two friends, a nice one and a grumpy one, which became Shelley and Remy. they had the mother, Hilda. They also had like Shelley and Remy's mothers were also characters originally, but I just felt like that was too much. Like they didn't need to be there, so I said let's lose these guys. And they had the man, the mysterious man, the villain, and that was basically it. So from there, it was about fleshing those characters out, trying to make them feel like maybe people that you grew up with or knew, because these girls have all been friends their whole lives. They've grown up in this tiny town, and trying to find ways to balance that the archetype of nice and mean into actual characters that don't just feel like sprites or archetypes or stereotypes, I guess. So yeah, that was fun. And Colette herself, like as the protagonist, I had a bit more of a vision of her being like a silver spoon type of spoiled rich kid who's like the next in line to become the grand receiver, the leader of this town. And I thought like that could be originally more part of her story, for her to kind of get taken down a peg when things don't go her way. But in doing that, I made her a bit probably less likable. Writers there's always that voice in the back of your head that says not to create a flawed character who's not just a Mary Sue, I think is the term that people use. And like Rey in Star Wars is a
Right.
example that people have used, where there's just like she's just too perfect. There's nothing wrong with her, therefore she's not interesting. And that was in my head, so I probably went a bit too far in trying to make Colette this kind of spoiled rich kid. And I remember Jared in Rainbite, or the other guys saying like she's a bit too unlikable. Like we need to make her a bit more plain. She's the protagonist. People have to like her. And I think where we ended up was a good balance. And introducing like some dialogue options gives players the chance to decide like how nice or how mean or how boastful do you want to be with this interaction. And that way you can't really blame the game. Like you're making that choice yourself.
I really like that too, because it feels generally low stakes, which I think is good in a game like this. I don't think you don't want to make a decision where it's like, oh my god, am I breaking a certain path in the game or something? So that's kind of cool. And it didn't feel out of place, because I remember commenting on Uncharted 4 having those weird dialogue options, and I was like, this is so weird. I liked that too when that popped up. But just out of curiosity, did you guys, because there's no trophies attached to them, did you guys place trackers in the game to see how people choose?
I don't think so. No. I didn't even realize you could do stuff like that. It would have been interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, you would have to have some sort of like network connection to the game, which some people do. We don't bother to, like, we first had like local leaderboards, then we just got rid of them completely, because you can either go in the direction of making them truly online and have some sort of symbiotic system where you can read it.
Yeah, there'd be a few things.
But yeah, I just didn't know, because I was surprised you didn't. I'm not surprised actually, because you don't want to make people play the game more than once. But I would have been really tempted to make some of those trophies myself. But we'll save that conversation for a little while. I wanted to ask you about this idea of ballisticism. I really loved this. I thought this was really, really cool. I think the story went in a different direction. And I guess we can start to kind of spoil it now, so people can bounce if they don't want spoilers of the game and go play it and come back. But I thought it was going more in a direction of, originally, it was going to be like some sort of commentary on guns. Like, I thought that's where it was going to go. And it kind of made sense to me. I'm like, well, this comes from a culture that doesn't really have the American appreciation of guns. And it's an interesting and topical thing, and all of the rest. And instead, and it's literally the worship of weapons, right? In the game, from my point of view, worship of guns. But then it went in this totally different direction, where it ends up being, I don't know if it's a commentary of, but certainly a spoofing of communism and Soviet and the Soviet way, I guess you want to say. I loved it. I thought it was really interesting, and it kind of did. I had different expectations for it, and it wasn't necessarily a bad thing that they weren't met. I liked that it kind of kept me on my toes. And I can't imagine, I think I said it on Sacred Symbols, that this is one of those games where you just will not be able to guess the twist. Like, it's not that it's bad. It's that it's
Yeah.
totally unthinkable and you would never think of it. And so, yeah, so talk to me a little bit about all this, the religion, the
Yeah.
Soviet stuff. Yeah, please.
It's interesting. Like some people, like no one sees the twist coming, and how could you? Like it's so out of left field, and it's a little bit polarizing. Like some people love it, and others are like, it was great. Like they love the story up until the unnecessary like reveal or whatever. And it's like, okay, like it's not for everyone. But as far as the guns and the ballisticism and that side of it, there was, I guess, this thought that people would look into the game as some kind of commentary on gun control, and a couple of reviews have done that and have thought that it was not handled well. But that's, I think, because they don't realize that it's not about gun control, and that if it was, even if it was, I think the message in the game is like, let's all chill out a bit with the guns. And I think, yeah, like there was a concern that it would be taken as a political thing, but ultimately, yeah, the guns, at least to me, and it's open to interpretation, to me, like they represent technology and progress and chasing things that pull you away from who you really are and your traditions and your customs. And for the witches, that's choosing guns over magic, and choosing like progress and power over the simple life. And you get that contrast between the goblins and the witches in the game, which was something that that Rainbite had from the start. Like they wanted the goblin society to be more, I don't know if primitive's the right word, but they're intense more than they are in like the cobblestone buildings. They're using like spears and that kind of weapon. Like they don't understand how the guns work. So yeah, so that, yeah, it was very baked in from the beginning, that concept of the witches discovering this portal, and as you could imagine in more ancient times, they didn't understand it, so they began to worship it, and it just took over every aspect of their culture. So you'd have to ask the other guys, exactly if that was to facilitate the the story, or just to be a fodder for all these puns and stuff, because there's so much
Sure.
like all the characters' names in the game are based on guns and weapon parts, and the the stained glass windows of the church are a barrel of a gun or whatever. So yeah, and I think that you know I think I'm really pleased with the way that the game ends and the message that it puts out about you know I deliberately didn't have it say guns are bad, and we deliberately didn't have it say guns are good. It's just like, forget about guns for a second. That's not really what the message is. It's something else completely. And the reason that I think that's important is because, like I said, that's not the type of game it is. That's not the idea that we're going for. And if it was, then I think that would be way more divisive than already what it is.
Yeah, I was, I don't know, I was pleased by it because the game made me think more than I thought it was going to make me think on a, I don't know, more
Mm.
philosophical level, and then you realize that that's just, there's nothing there.
Yeah,
Or like there's not where you think it's going to be, let's say.
and
There's no, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, I was interrupting you, but one of the things I forgot to say was that even if we wanted to make it an anti-violence or anti-gun message, the fact is, like, there's an end game, and you're still going to be running around with these weapons that you've collected for the past 8 hours. So it would be kind of like, it wouldn't work at all to still have those guns, and after just coming out of a cutscene that says, like, you know, the guns are bad, to then
Right.
go on and like blast everyone. And it's kind of that thing, like for example, The Last of Us Part 2. It's like, it's of clearly a statement about revenge and violence, but you have to experience all that violence and revenge to get to the point that you're trying to make. So I felt like for us, like, that worked perfectly with Naughty Dog, but I felt like for us it would be pretty hypocritical to build an entire game around the fun that it is to just blast these creatures into smithereens, and then turn around and be like, all that killing you've been doing, let's cut it out. No more
Yeah.
guns.
Yeah, and then like go play New Game Plus now.
Yeah, and
You know,
now you have a
yeah,
wand.
yeah, I totally agree with that's interesting about the dissonance, because in reading, I love that you brought up the stained glass window, because I loved that. I loved the church because I thought it was very literal. It's like they're worshiping, literally worshiping guns and American, American. It just felt there felt something there, and then when you went into the goblin territory and you realized that they were living a more primitive, like they weren't what you thought, and all of that, and you're kind of encroaching on them. And am I making it up, or do you learn that the technology was kept from them, right?
Yeah, so
Right.
there's like these colonialism kind of themes in there too, where
Right.
they build up the goblins to be this enemy that was like, trying to take control of the portal, but it was really the witches who were basically keeping it to themselves and shutting the goblins out.
Right. So was that an intentional commentary?
Yeah, it wasn't intentional with the idea that a one-for-one comparison to, Native Americans in America or like
Well, I
Australians.
was thinking from that perspective from you. For you,
Yeah,
I was
no,
going to say more Australian, and yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't meant to be like a one-for-one comparison. I guess just like the concept in general of we, especially in Australia, we have been brought up with a white Australia perspective on our history, and as as society has progressed and maybe I've just gotten older, you start to see, oh, wait a second, we weren't exactly reasonable with the way that we treated these people. They were massacred. It was a terrible tragedy for their culture. Even like in the last 50 years, there's the stolen generation. I don't know if you know about this, where like
No.
white Australia came along and took children away from those communities because they decided that they weren't fit to raise them. So all these Aboriginal and Indigenous children were raised by white people, and the effects are still being felt generations later from people who feel like they've lost their culture and they've lost their history, and now they don't even know who their grandparents were or whatever it might be. So yeah, like as you get older, you learn that there's another side to this story that's a very dark side. So I guess there's an element of that in there where I really wanted it to be kind of for narrative reasons, there to be a bit of a twist once you get to the goblins, and it's, oh, wait a second, now that I'm hearing their side of things, maybe we're the bad guys. Like that's kind of what we were going for.
Yeah, I like that. I like that twist as well. It seems like this stuff, I'm understanding this stuff better than, Twin Breaker. I really tried to make like a commentary on war, and it's just, I don't think anyone understood it. I think that's a me problem. One of the things I really liked with your game is the dialogue, and I thought this is where the game really shined for me in this in the respect of the writing. I think obviously conceptually it's really cool too, but the way it's delivered, the characterization, as you were mentioning earlier with the girls, and I like the mother character, and two of the characters I really enjoyed, although you don't see them and hear from them very much, are the shopkeepers, the two shopkeepers, especially in the human settlement, because I can hear them in my head. Like I hear the way they set like their line, because you read it pretty often, and I can hear it, and I hear the kind of intonation and all of that. And I just wanted to compliment you on that as well. But how did you get into the writing of dialogue? I assume writing novels certainly helped. This is something that I have massive problems doing. I don't tend towards things that I'm not naturally good at, and I can write up treatment all day, and I can write up a 10-page thing about what happens in a story or whatever, but filling it out is much more difficult. And I'm wondering how you went about that process.
It's hard to critique your own abilities in writing, I think, but I can at least say I've always enjoyed writing dialogue. I'm not going to say that I've always been good at it, but I've always enjoyed it. That's as much as I have to go off. Like even going back to high school and creative writing and stuff that I got into back then, I always loved that side of writing, and to the point where like in different things I've written, including my books, like there would almost be like too much dialogue. Like the in between the dialogue sections were always harder for me. Like he looked around, he walked through the door, he wondered about his whatever it was. Like that stuff I always found harder. So a game, especially the script of a game, is almost all dialogue. So it felt natural to me to write it out that way, and I really enjoyed that. And as far as like the dialogue specifically for Trigger, which I'm probably more used to writing natural dialogue for the way that we talk. So then to jump into a fantasy world where there's a different dialect was a fun challenge, because you can build off these tropes and stereotypes of in fantasy, and we did that a lot. Like there's Lord of the Rings references, and there's Harry Potter references, and Wizard of, like there's movie references coming everywhere in this game, which is a big part of what I like to do as well in writing. And I think that it was a fun challenge, because it was a bit of a mix between trying to be trying to mix the way that people talk, like we talk, because that makes these teenage witches a bit more relatable, the fact that they're similar to us, but then interjecting more old-fashioned, I don't even know what the term is, but the like,
let's call it like the nomenclature.
That's a good word, Colin. That's why you're here. Like go with haste. Like that's something that I wouldn't say, but it's something that a fantasy character would say, or it is said that long ago. Like just these types of nomenclature that that wouldn't be a natural part of everyday dialogue now. So I'd be like reading through like archaic terminology was the word that I was Googling and searching. So finding archaic words, finding archaic expressions, watching movies like Lord of the Rings instead of reading the book, and picking up on certain terms that they use that I'm like, that's a very fantasy like expression that wouldn't be found in a, cyberpunk game or a dystopian future game. So that was part of the process as well. And I naturally, because this world of Evertonia is so vibrant and fun, and there's this juxtaposition between violence and cutesy art style, I just knew the game had to have a light tone to it for the most part. So there is a lot of attempts at humor. There's a lot of, people have called them in reviews dad jokes, and I have to accept that that's probably what they are, because
sure,
who am I to argue? And I'm a dad
that's
now.
Fine. Right.
Yeah, and I think most people for the most part have enjoyed that approach at lighter moments and keeping the pacing ticking along. But I also wanted there to be these more serious moments where, games that I'm a fan of, like Final Fantasy VII, I think is a good example where, there is goofy characters and there's a lot of attempts at humor, but then there's also these moments where, let's get down to business. This is a very serious and sensitive issue or moment for these characters. And I really think RPGs were, like those style of RPGs especially, were the way that I was writing the game, because this genre in itself doesn't really exist. Like twin stick shooters, open world with narrative, like they're all roguelites or they're arcade style gameplay. Like there's not really an RPG with twin stick dungeons, like everything like that. I felt like it was a very unique combination of gameplay elements that make up Trigger Witch. And the way that I tackle the story, I've seen a lot of people say it's basically an RPG, and that I guess I take that as a compliment, because that's what I was inspired by.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like a Zelda game, which has always been, especially the older ones, have always been in this mysterious place where it's like, what is this game? People used to be much more quick to reject the term role-playing game for those games, but I actually think that it's made more sense as time has gone on. And certainly I feel that the dialogue was incredibly additive. Nothing got in the way. I don't feel like the game stayed around too long. In fact, one of the things I wanted to compliment you on as well, which I thought was really cool and very reminiscent of the role-playing games that you're inspired by, was in the church you read a book that kind of gives you an insight into ballisticism and their history or whatever, but it gives you the option to continue or get out. which I think Dragon Quest games would do, and others when you're reading something very long. And
Yeah.
I liked little design choices like that. I kept reading. There's a trophy at the end. I didn't know that when I was doing so, but I thought there were just thoughtful touches like that. Like, let's keep this going. If you get into this conversation on accident,
Yeah.
you don't have to like press X. So there was, it wasn't. I like that the game didn't force you to absorb the writing. I assume that there are plenty of people that played the game that don't care about the story,
Yeah.
right? And there's something
Definitely.
there, right? I mean, we've all been there, and I'm sure people feel that way about my games too. Lots of people, and that's great as long as there's something there for them to enjoy. I don't care if I'm just window dressing or wallpaper for them. I wanted to ask you about the design of the game in terms of how much control did you have over the structure, the length, and all of that based on the story that you wanted to tell? Because I assume you had to marry all these things together. It has a very dungeon-like structure, so very Zelda-like in its approach. What did that look like putting that all together, and how much did you have to say about that?
Sure. So I'd say the amount of dialogue that I wrote would be my input into how long the game is. I think if you took it all, like you can, people have speed run this game in like 2 hours. So you really could smash through it if you know what you're doing and skip all the dialogue in like 3 or 4 hours. So it probably would be a lot more closer to Reverie game length without the focus on dialogue. As far as my input into it, I think, the structure of the game was basically set as far as you've got these 3 dungeons to the south of the map, then you unlock the top area, there's a couple more, and the final dungeon. So that was all set in place. So it really was just about, for me, trying to add detail to this plot that they'd put together originally, make everything make sense, but not overstay your welcome. Because as you said, like, even like I've watched pretty much every bit of content that's been made about this game, aside from like the hour-long Let's Plays and that kind of thing. But all the people playing the demo when it was on Xbox, I watched all those videos, and it was good to see, like, some people sit there and they read the dialogue out loud, and some people skip through it all. They just want to get to the action. And we knew that would be an issue, so deliberately tried to not make any sequences that were just incredibly dialogue heavy. And there's a part in the game where it's like you're going from one cutscene with the Oracle to a cutscene with your mum, and then a cutscene with the Goblin King, and then a cutscene in the jail. So it was this really long sequence of dialogue, and like one of my roles, I guess I've given myself the title narrative director because I did have some influence in shaping some of the gameplay. So one of the things I did was inject these dialogue options that give people a reason to actually stop and read and be engaged, so they're not just hammering X constantly. And on top of that, I inserted this idea, like, what if, you actually, instead of the man in black kidnapping your mother straight away, maybe there's a little mini boss fight that you're meant to lose. So that breaks up the gameplay a bit. Then you go north to the Goblin King, and he makes you fight in the arena. So originally the arena was going to be like a complete side mini game. And I thought if we add that in there, then at least that also breaks up the dialogue between those 2 cutscenes. So I don't know if this is answering your question about my impact on the length of the game, but that was the kind of scope I had to make suggestions about the way that the game played out. And for the most part, like, Rainbite were really receptive to my ideas, and I was almost like reluctant to suggest things because it's not my game. I'm a contractor; it's their baby, and it would just always be like, in the script I'd write, like, it'd be great if we could have, once you reach the Oracle, she takes you outside, and there's a beautiful view of the the game, like the game world, and that's an example for me that was really important for pacing in the game and for like building the world, like seeing it from a distance and seeing like the entire map basically. So that was completely my suggestion, and I was really glad that it made its way into the game because it ended up being, I think, the most iconic shot that we have. It's the credits scene. It's the last clip I used in the trailer. So I'm really thrilled that they listened and cared about my perspective to the point that they would change some of the environmental aspects to help tell the story.
Yeah, I love that shot too. I was gonna say that shot really tickled in me. I'm always seeking feelings of nostalgia, even if you can't explain them, or feelings of that sort of comfiness, that comfort, and something about that shot really, and the shades of color that are used and all the rest just really invoked this. Obviously these are old looking games,
Yeah.
but inspired something. It's the same thing with the credits. I don't know if it was inspired. I don't know if it was intentional, but that text in the credits reminds me of the original Castlevania's credits.
Okay.
And I don't know if that was intentional. I imagine probably not. But
probably not.
Speaking of the credits, I noticed that the playtester playtester list really long. I was wondering what kind of I was one of them. I played it very briefly, just a small build, but I was curious what other people's input, how that helped shape the game for you guys, because that was something we really learned a pretty important lesson on with Twin Breaker, and let more people in with Abraxia 2. And I think next time we'll even let more people in. I think that there's almost nothing to lose by doing something like that. I think we were a little too tight. And so we didn't know how hard, for instance, Twin Breaker was really going to be for people, etc. How did people help you shape the game?
A lot of it was honestly just finding bugs. Like you and Barry were able to play it early. I don't know, like if you didn't seem to experience a lot of issues, but there were
I don't remember. I'd have to look even at what I wrote.
And there were people that had it even earlier than that probably found a lot more. And I like, for example, I played on PS4 and I had a bug that would basically remove all my weapons and I couldn't get them back. So I had to reload, like restart the game basically. So there were, with such a big game, well, big in the sense of there's a lot of areas and a lot of things that can go wrong. So yeah, the testers were very helpful with finding issues like that, and it was mostly just giving people early access so that they could do that. There was like Rainbite has some like a lot of friends in the New Zealand game dev community, so I think they had some people that know what they're talking about from that side of thing come into the game and test it. And like even my brother got to play like a build, like a PC build, like a year ago, and he suggested a few things that ended up in the game, like really basic things. So I think, yeah, it was a good mix of people who we just wanted their thoughts about how it felt, and I think you and Barry were among that group. And then there were people that were testing it close to launch that were helping us look for any major issues. So yeah, it was a mix.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at the list of suggestion, or like my list of feedback, which is actually mostly positive, and just scanning it. But one thing it's funny that I say here, and this would be my biggest complaint about the game, and I think other people had this to say too. I'm wondering what you feel about it. I say here, I think you guys probably know this, but this game needs a quest log or perhaps a more robust menu system. I noticed that people felt, I mean, I got lost a couple of times because I didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And I saw that in just a little bit of feedback, just anecdotally, because I haven't read any of the criticism.
Yeah.
Was that something you guys wish you tended to more? Because that was my only complaint. There was a time specifically, because I was trying to really eat it in bite sizes because I was so bored with everything else. And I'm like, I know this game's probably going to take me no more than 8 to 10 hours to platinum. I'm just going to be bored again. But there was one point where I'm like, I don't even know what I have to do right now. And I put the game down. So
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. What's your feedback on, or like, what's the feedback been? And yeah, so actually, let's just wrap this all in. What has it been like reading critical feedback, and what have been the complaints about the game?
Sure. So to answer the first part, like kind of late in development, we added even the most basic quest log in the game, which was find the 3 ingredients and then, create the potion, explore the goblin area, like just the most basic ones. And you've got the big X's on the map that tell people kind of where to go.
Right.
But one of the feedback things that we've heard a lot is that once you're into, say the mine, I don't know where to go. Like, and so we've patched in recently, I think it's in the PS4 version, but maybe not the others as of recording right now, because the others take a bit longer. There's maps for the keys that you need to find. So once you collect the map for that particular dungeon, the chests with the keys will show up once you've been in those rooms. So if you miss a key, it'll be a lot easier to find, which will save some people. We heard that some people wasted like an hour looking for a key. I don't know if you were in that position.
Yeah, I think it was. I think I just know enough now to just be like, I got to come back to this later, and I'll just see it with new eyes.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was quite that long, but there were times where I was definitely running around not knowing what to do.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and that's a good example of something that we've patched, or I say we, but Jared's patched into the game to address that feedback. And it is interesting, like the things that you overlook or you don't think they're a big issue, and then the reviews come out and it's like, oh, I guess that is harder than we thought. So it's been great. Like, it's my first game, Colin. Like, it's my first time creating something that people have reviewed. Like, that is a pretty crazy feeling. And a lot of people are like, don't want to read any reviews. Just tell me the score. Like, they don't want to know what they did wrong, especially if there's glitches or there's, things that were out of someone's control that they're being criticized for now. It's like, just don't tell me about it. And it's kind of like when I released my book, sometimes people will be like, oh, there's a typo on page 37. And I'm like, damn it. Like, don't even tell me. Like, I can't do anything about it now.
Right. Yeah. So I totally, it's a little bit different for those different mediums for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's funny because for Twin Breaker I voraciously tried to eat up as much as possible, and then I kind of got annoyed, and so
I actually love it. Like, I've been eating up every single bit of content. Like, that's what I was getting at. Like, it's my first time being judged, and I'm just devouring every review, every podcast that's mentioned it in their description. I'm scrubbing through to hear what people have to say, and it might be because I'm a bit more removed from the game as the three people who have dedicated their life to it for 2.5 years. But I just love hearing people's thoughts on it, because part of it is because I'm so satisfied and content with the game. I love playing it. Like, I'm playing through it slowly with my wife at the moment in co-op, because she doesn't play games, and the twin stick thing is just like, she needs to take a break for like 4 days every time she plays it for 20 minutes, which is backwards because she completely forgets how to play it.
Right. She's got to stick with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And every like 3 lines of dialogue, she stops and says, oh, that reminds me of the. I'm just like, let's play the game. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. So yeah, what was I even saying? Yeah, it's been great to just experience people's views on the game, and like I said, I'm so happy with it that if people love it, that's great. There's some people who it's made for and they love everything about it. To some people, this is like a 9 or a 10 out of 10, and that's who the game was made for. A lot of people are like, it's great, but there's feedback that maybe it's the gameplay's too repetitive, or that the story, like, there's too much dialogue, or they might say that there's too much backtracking in the dungeons, and they're things that either can or can't be addressed with a patch. And it's also fair, like, when you make something like this, what the flaws are likely to be, or what some people might not like. So we knew that some people might think there's too much dialogue, and we knew that some people might find the game too easy, but that seemed like the best way to make it the game that we wanted it to be. And at the same time, as you know, you can't please everyone, especially with the difficulty thing. I know that especially with Twin Breaker, you experienced this, where I found the game quite easy. Some people found it too hard. Then some people complained that the game's too quick. And then other people will say it's like a bargain for the price. So it's like these people's feedback don't line up. There's no really consensus about any of the issues in the game, apart from some of the early performance issues that have been patched out. And when you hear something like, a couple of reviews have mentioned like the music, like they hate the music, and I'm just sitting there like, to me, I know this isn't like technically correct, but to me, the music is like objectively amazing. Like, I don't even know how people can't like it.
All right. So you're getting into why I was curious about your answer to this, because I got really annoyed. Well, not annoyed. That's where I ended up. With Twin Breaker, I really read reviews and listened to everything everyone had to say, and I'm like, okay. And everyone's like, or not everyone, but the criticisms were like, why is there so much story? And I'm like, it's supposed to be ironic, like that the game has a huge story. And like, it's like, why is there dialogue? And I'm like, because it's supposed to be ridiculous that a game like this would have a story. That's the idea.
Yeah.
And then so when we were making Habroxia 2, I was like, you know what? Not gonna get burned again. Let's make this game in the real spirit of the old school games, right? I'm gonna make, in fact, Castlevania 3 is an overt influence on the game's intro, right down to the way it's structured in 5 parts and all of the rest. And I tried to just hide the story in the worlds, in like the descriptions and the boss descriptions, to kind of just let you like use your head. It almost reminded me of old GI Joes, where it's like, this GI Joe is a mercenary on this, and this guy is a pilot, and you just like kind of figure, and it's like, all right, so I have enough information now, I'm gonna like do what I do. And then people were like, where's the story? And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, so when I and we have an 80 on Metacritic, and it annoys me because I'm like, we would probably have closer to a 90 on Metacritic with Habroxia 2 if I like wrote a story. And instead I was like, no, I'm scared. Everyone didn't like the last time I wrote a story and told me it didn't belong there. And that's why we got worse scores. So at that point, and I'll say specifically, I don't remember what review it is, but I read a review for Habroxia 2 where they're like, the game just throws you in. It doesn't even tell you, like, set anything up or give you anything. And I'm like, that's not true at all.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I was like, no more. And so I don't want to seem like I'm shut off to. I just feel like it was really hard for me to be on the other side, and it gave me a real appreciation of. I've been staying my words more and more, and like trying to be more and more fair, deliberate with the way I deliver feedback. Do you feel like, because you said you've absorbed all this, and I know that this is a really open-ended question, but do you feel like the feedback is fair? I'm looking at the Metacritic 73. That doesn't seem.
What console is that for?
I don't know. That is
for Switch. Yeah. So it's 78 on PS4.
78 on Play. Okay, so it's so funny. All right, and on Xbox One doesn't have a score.
It hasn't got enough reviews on Xbox.
Yeah, it doesn't have enough. Okay, cool. Because I hate that fucking Metacritic does all that. Just mix it all up.
Yeah.
But that I was gonna say, that seemed like a green score on Metacritic seemed much more fair to me, and I do feel like Twin Breaker and Habroxia 2 are underscored games. And it's so funny because I'm saying, of course I think that, but I feel like I could be objective enough to say like, no, this game is, I reviewed games forever. I know that it seems impossible for me to be able to remove myself, but I feel like I can. So I think that's what annoyed me too, is it's not thin skin. It's just like, I don't know, man. I think Twin Breaker has like a 69 or a 70. I'm like, no, I'm like, bullshit. It's as far as brick breakers are concerned, it's like one of the greatest brick breakers ever made. Like, seriously, what the hell?
Yeah.
So anyway,
I think that comes back to like, you made the game that you wanted to make, and for some people it is like an 8 or a 9 out of 10 probably. Like they didn't think that there was too much story. And the same for Habroxia. Like you say, if you gave it a story, it may have been a 90. Well, if you gave it a story, those people that said they wanted a story might not have liked the story, or they might have said there's too much. So you can't really think that way. So just be happy with the game that you've made, I think. And it sounds like you are happy with the games you made. So just let that be the way you look at it, Colin. But
fair enough.
But yeah, the feedback has mostly been fair. Like, it's super obvious when you read a review that they haven't played through the whole game, especially when there's a twist like we have. You read reviews that are like, oh, it's just basics fantasy fare, like it's, whatever. And it's like, dude, like,
see, I would be so tempted to call these people out and be like, listen.
Oh, I have. Yeah. I may have left a comment in someone else's name that said, what did you think of the ending? But anyway, and then, there's been a website that reviewed the game very critically from like the gun control perspective and focusing on the story, and they didn't like the big reveal at the end. And I think like that's a misreading of the game, a misinterpretation of what was being said. If anyone thinks like, I think they specifically were uncomfortable with the message about gun control, and I'm like, dude, I'm basically anti-guns. I live in Australia. Like, I wrote The Spy and the Maven, and it's about the protagonist is like very anti-gun. Like, it's not a gun message. You've got it wrong, basically. But at the same time, I understand that you can't really tell someone that their reading on something is wrong, because if I'd done a better job, then it would be perfectly obvious. So there's that kind of thing in the back of my head too. But essentially, I just kind of cast those opinions out, like a goldfish. I just try and forget about anything that's too negative or too positive. I'm just like, try and stay baseline and not get wrapped up in it, because at the end of the day, I'm happy with it. I know Rainbite are happy with it, and the people that we made it for are enjoying the game. Even like going beyond the critics, it's great to have positive reviews. I think I've been calculating our average review score even beyond the Metacritic ones, and it is like a 7.8 out of 10 overall, which is great. But from the people that I see tweeting about it, and the videos that go on YouTube and the Twitch streams, and friends of mine who've played the game, like, those opinions matter just as much, if not more, than the critics. The reason you want the critics to like it is because you want them to tell people to buy the game. People are buying the game. It's doing fine, and I think it's doing well. So I'm just really happy that some of the reviews have mentioned specifically the sound design and story that I've been involved with, and a lot of them have said well written, or like fully realized world, or these things that they say, and it validates what you already felt. But to hear other people praise the things that you've worked on specifically has been really great.
I like what you said about, because I agree about you can't put into others I know you can't project your own interpretation of your own work onto others. They're going to interpret it the way you want to. And I think that was part of my frustration too, where I'm like, don't you being so trying to be cute by half with Twinbreaker, and then like want to shake people by the lapel and be like, don't you understand that if you put these things in order by date, it's like it tells a story about how like war has engulfed the entire planet. And it's like, well, no, they don't care. So it's like, that's not. So I find that quite humorous as well.
Yeah. It's like your buddy Christopher Nolan talking about the audio design in his movies, and how people are like, we can't hear what the characters are saying, and he's like, well, that's how it's meant to be.
Yeah, he said that literally about the original run of Dark Knight Rises, right, where like they had to go back in and dub Bane, and I think he said something like, well, it doesn't matter if you understand Bane, and it's like, what are you talking about? It doesn't matter if you understand Bane. All right, I wanted to ask you, so it's so funny how the story and even your own experience with people at the gun control and all that kind of shit, it's funny how it ping pongs around, because when I saw the Soviet stuff, specifically that it was lampooning the Soviets and communism, I started to get worried for you guys for a totally different reason. And right. I was wondering if you had any negative feedback based on, I don't know, the relative reality that it deals with, the hammer and sickle.
Yeah. No, like, there hasn't really been anyone. I haven't seen any Russian reviews for the game yet. I'd like to see what Russia thinks of the game. I'd also like to see what the Disco Elysium developers think of the game. That would be fascinating if they ever play it. But no,
yeah, that would be. I mean, you ever wonder about like the famous people that do play your game? Like, I think about that. Like, I know certain developers like Cory Barlog and Neil Druckmann played our games and all this kind of stuff, and that's cool. But I always wonder about, like, we sold, I don't know, 10,000 copies of Roxy 2. It's probably a little more now. Is like one of those random copies like
Chris Pratt,
Vin Diesel?
Yeah,
Chris. Oh, maybe Chris Pratt. You ever think about that? Like, is it?
It hasn't
Did
crossed my
some
mind
random
yet.
like famous? I love thinking about that.
Well,
If our game like touched someone who I don't want to say matters, but matters to the general person.
I mean, I did tweet at Ben Swartz, who you might know from Parks and Rec and the voice of Sonic the Hedgehog, because there's a reference to one of his improv sketches on Netflix in the NPC dialogue, and he was like, "Wow, that's amazing." So there's a little bit of me that's like, I wonder if Ben Swartz is ever going to play this game, but that's beside the point. It's what was the question again? Sorry. Sorry. We're talking about the Russia stuff. Yeah.
Right. But I want to ask you. You brought up the performance of the game too.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to touch on this before as we begin to wrap up ourselves. Are you able to talk about how the game is doing? I mean, how do you?
No, not really.
As you now understand, probably it's a complete nightmare to track this stuff. And
yeah. I mean, I've asked because we have the physical editions as well. There's 4,000 physical editions that have almost,
and you sold through those
almost completely. Like I know this.
That's awesome. So that's a great start.
Yeah. So awesome. I think the Switch ones are close to selling out, and the PS5 ones will probably take a little bit longer because obviously there's not as many PS5s out in the world. But that's that. Like I said,
wait, you guys are doing a PS5 physical edition?
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't see that. That's super cool.
Yeah.
Neat.
Play Asia.
Cool.
Yeah. There's no PS4 physical edition and there's no Xbox physical edition.
I don't think the Xbox physical edition stuff.
No, they don't.
Does that even happen at all? I don't think
they don't seem to do well for whatever reason. Yeah.
Interesting.
And it might be because
Game Pass.
I don't know if the website Play Asia means that they cater towards an Asian market or I don't really understand it, but I'm guessing like Xbox just doesn't have the same collecting fan base that we do in PlayStation land and in Nintendo land perhaps. But yeah, the game's doing well. We can say it's sold in the thousands, and I'm not allowed to say more. I think mostly just because certain people involved, publishers and platforms, don't like talking about it for some reason. I don't know. I think if it's like we've sold 2 million copies, they would talk about it, but it's not 2 million. I can confirm that.
Yeah, my goal for our games is always I want to celebrate 10,000, 25,000, 50,000. And then if we have more than that, that's a really great problem to have. And a couple of our games have reached 10, so we've celebrated that, but we won't say anything until those games reach 25, and they probably never will, I would assume.
I think the game's doing well in Japan, which has been great to see. Like
that's rad.
If you do search for Trigger Witch on YouTube, for example, it seems like half the content is in Japanese, and it's been published in or translated into like Spanish and French and German and Portuguese. So it's cool to see these foreign language reviews and translate them in Google Translate and see how it's accepted in other cultures. It's been really cool, just as a fascinating thing, really.
For the people, I mean, I'm curious too, and you don't have to answer this, but I know a lot of people ask how to get a job in writing in the industry, but moreover how the deals look, because there's a lot of freelancers and consultants, and there are very few full-time staff writers.
Yeah,
you have to be a pretty big studio to have a writer, or more than one.
Even like Walt Williams, who's like one of the big writers. Like I don't know if he's ever just been like salaried positioned at any company.
Not as a writer. Yeah. Like I think the last time he was salaried was at Irrational when he was a producer producing BioShock. So yeah, that's totally true. Yeah, because he worked for Jaeger and all of the others. I'm just curious, are you able to talk about, and I don't need you to get specific in the money, but are you able to talk about how your deal is structured? Because you don't own the company, or you're not so is it like back-end royalties or an upfront percentage? Like what kind of deal did you work out for yourself?
Well, I should say first of all, because it's 1 3-man studio, it's not going to be whatever I say now isn't probably going to be what it is for every other studio,
right?
But and also because I'm friends with these guys, there's a bit more leeway into figuring some of this stuff out. But basically, it's like a flat rate payment for my time, which includes like the sound design and the writing, and then per X amount of copies sold, there'll also be some commission on that too within the first
Cool.
month. So if you're going to buy the game, buy it in the next 2 weeks, please.
Yeah, buy it now. That's awesome. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
To know. And yeah, you talked a little bit about the sound design. And you talked about the soundtrack, which is different, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But how did you get involved in this? Because I didn't even know that this was like a passion of yours. I mean, we both are musicians and music lovers, but I have no knowledge of sound design at all.
I didn't really either. I just thought that it was fun. So the origin story of me getting into the sound design is basically that when the Man in Black shows up, I wanted there to be like a Kefka style laugh that announces his arrival. Exactly, yeah. And so I was literally messing around with like the Kefka sound clip, and every other sound in this game is like a natural sound effect. There's no like 8-bit like distorted effects. So it was never going to work, and it's probably completely illegal to remix a sound from another game. So that was just me mucking around with something. But I ended up stumbling into this idea that, creating the sounds for this game is quite an arduous task for a programmer and an artist and the other guys, like the world designer. So I just thought, like, because my stint in writing was mostly wrapped up about 12 months ago, I just had, like, getting back to what we were talking about at the start of this interview or discussion, I just have to work on something at all times. Like, I just have that in me. And I was like, what if I create some sounds? What if I redo some of the gun effects that they weren't happy with? We need, like, reload sounds. We need ejecting casing sounds. We need these sounds that don't exist yet, because they did have a sound library that they'd subscribed to. And I don't know if Barry uses something like that, or if he makes everything from scratch.
No, I think our sounds are from scratch.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So there was like some Foley and some sound, a bit of a sound library there to start with. But I managed to get them to say yes, and they like some of the noises that I made. And it really started with just a handful of key moments in the game. Like there's a dragon. You have to cut out the dragon's tongue. And I wanted there to be like a really gross kind of like stretching kind of guttural primal kind of sound of ripping that tongue out. So I started with just like a few, and then I was like, this is awesome. I want to keep doing this more. And I ended up doing like hundreds of sounds for this game. All the magic, all the enemies that are killed, there's ambient sounds in each area. If you turn the music down, especially, you'll hear them a lot more. Not that I would suggest to do that, because the music's awesome. And then again, like all the dialogue when the characters are talking, there's the me kind of sounds as the text comes up on the screen. So all those little things I got to work on and have such a great time, because I am a writer. So doing these sound design jobs was completely novel to me, and just like a great learning experience, and trying to, what does a dragon sound like? How do I make that? And then what does a magic fireball sound like? And how can I make this flamethrower loop perfectly without sounding like it's gonna, get static at the end? So partly from being like a podcast editor of my own work for like the last 4 years, that's, I guess, the base of messing around with sound. But from there, it was just self-taught and accessing a great library. There's a lot of free resources out there as well that have basically royalty-free licensing for using their sounds too. So yeah, that was not something that people associate the game with me over, but it is a big part for me. Like I'm like, anytime anyone mentions the sound effects in a review, I'm just like, yes, that's me.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It's like it's like when a rapper is in a movie, or like a movie star does, like when Kobe Bryant used to like rap on a track for like, Common or whoever. Like they like that when it's not their wheelhouse, they're so excited about it, and that's basically me with the sound design.
Yeah, I love that reference. Yeah, the sounds are great, and the soundtrack, like you said, really well done as well. Well, what's the future hold for you as far as writing in this regard? I mean, what kind of connections have you made? quite a bit of ghostwriting happens in this industry, and there are obviously stabs of writers and contributors and all of that. I'm just wondering if you're sniffing around trying to do more.
Not yet. I mean, I am trying to do more, but I've been focused on kind of promoting Trigger Witch and sharing it and getting it out there at the moment. But, basically after this podcast is over, I think that's like the bulk of the coverage that I've had planned to promote the game. So, and as I said before, I'm already getting itchy. Like, what am I going to work on next? So I feel like this is a bit of a job interview for the RPG, for your RPG.
Yeah, I want to make that work, just because I just think I'm starting to come to terms with my own life, with my own, it's not my own limits. It's like, I'm really tired. It's not like this, like it's not a malaise. It's just, I've never stepped back and like enjoyed anything really. And I actually wrote a letter to the audience today when we're recording this, that we're just telling them, like, listen, like, we were going to do these Let's Plays, but we can't do it. It's just too much work.
Right.
Everyone needs like everyone needs a break. We're doing 6 shows a week. So yeah, so it's I'm eager to talk to you more about that.
Sure.
And I think we will be able to figure something out. I think the first thing for me is to just get this thing finally written, like, out of me and off these notebooks and off these Google Docs and stuff. Like, I know what the game is all about. I mean, I can see it all in my weird head, so now I need to just get it out, and I think people are going to love it.
Just to tease the audience, we've spoken a bit about it, and I think that it's great. I've got ideas for it already. I've got like notes for it already. So
cool. That's great to know. Yeah. I mean, in the coming weeks, we'll definitely talk more about that, but
otherwise, I'm very open to working on more games. I'd love to. It's a difficult thing because I have a full-time job. So it's, occasionally these things pop up where there's an opportunity, but it's like 20 hours a week, or it's, 2 or 3 days a week. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to quit my job to work on a game for 6 months. Like, I don't know how people do it. Like full time, people just bounce around from one project to another, and I'm just like, it's intimidating, because I want to, like, I almost have to specifically aim at indies like Rainbite and Lily Mo and people that are cool with me and will say, like, you don't have to work like 2 days a week, like, just get it done, basically. Like, that's the way I operate, because I do have a job and I do have a family and I do have, content that I'm a content creator with 8-bit, and I'm passionate about the podcast that I do. So it's really difficult to find something that's like structured. So I guess it is about making connections, and hopefully people play Trigger Witch and enjoy the story enough that I can leverage off that into reaching out to people, or for people to reach out to me, ideally, when they have a game that needs some amount of dialogue or editing or anything, because I'm open to whether it's, writing a tutorial, edit the menu text, collectibles, like whatever it is. I just love the collaboration and process of working on games and seeing it brought to life. It's just it is novel to me, so maybe I won't sound as passionate about it if I continue to do it for a long time. But for all I know, like, this could be it, because it's such a rare thing to come along. So I'm just enjoying it while I can, really.
Yeah, I try. Well, this is what I need to do more of, is to try to stay in the moment and enjoy these little victories as well. I think that it puts into perspective what you're saying about, you got to give it up to the creative people out there that really do that say, like, fuck it, I'm quitting. And people are in different positions to do that. You have a child, you have a wife, like, but people even in those situations do it. And I couldn't live like that. Like, the older I get, the more risk averse I become. So the things I used to do in my teens and 20s, when I'd be like, yeah, I'll do this, yeah, I'll do that, I'll go here, I'll go there, I'm like, I don't know. Now I'm too risk averse. There's too much to lose. And so,
but you did do it. Like, you quit IGN and you quit Kind of Funny. Like, each of those decisions was to some extent jumping into something that was unknown. It's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I think it has. Well, yeah, that's true. Thank you. All right, Jono. Well, I'm looking at my notes here. I think I've touched on everything. I'm curious, do you have any closing comments? Things you wanted to leave out here on the field?
Well, not really. I guess I should say, like, thank you, Colin, for being such a great supporter of Rainbite and myself. Like, I've lost track of how many times you've mentioned the game Trigger Witch on Sacred Symbols, and that's every time it happens, people will message Rainbite and say that Colin turned them onto the game or onto Reverie. I know that you included that in one of your videos back when you were doing SideQuest. So yeah, we really appreciate what you have done for us, just in terms of being a supporter and tastemaker, and even like this podcast here. I'm sure that this will turn some people onto the game. So thank you for being a good friend and being a good supporter of the game. And to the people,
very welcome.
And to your listeners as well, like the listeners out there, keep sending us those messages, because we love the positive feedback. We live off props.
Yeah, a lot of creative people do. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's fascinating. I don't play favorites really too often, but there are games from studios that I can't avoid, like Housemarque, right, where I'm like, I have a huge fanboy kind of relationship with this. And then there are my friends in the world that I think are making authentically good games. What's funny is that no one ever puts me out and is like, hey man, you want to try my game? And it sucks. Like, it doesn't really happen. Thank God. Like, it really doesn't happen. So whether I think about my friends at Drinkbox with all of their games, or whether I think about my friends at Yacht Club with their games, and Tom Happ coming out with Axiom Verge 2 soon, and you guys are the same, where it's not really an awkward position for me to say, like, listen, and I'm always upfront. I'm like, listen, these are my friends, and I have, access to them and access to the game early, and we usually don't do that, but I wouldn't pimp something that wasn't great. And they know that I wouldn't say, like, this is a game you should check out if it wasn't true. And so I don't think people understand the plight of the indie, about how lucky we are to have any sort of platform to help propel these games, because so many games come out that don't sell any copies. I like, even good games, even reasonable games, sell hundreds of copies sometimes, and that we can help ameliorate that, or at least direct people towards some games that we think are quality that happen to be made by our friends, I think is one of the great things we can do with our show. So and I am certainly happy to do it, and I congratulate you guys on thousands of copies sold. Hopefully it continues to grow. Give my best to the dudes at Rainbite, and we've said it already, you should really check out Reverie as well, because I really love that game, and that's on Vita.
It is.
Yeah, so you can play that there if you want, but the others are on the other platforms, the HD Twins and Switch, coming to the next gen ones, or the current gen ones, I guess, later this year. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can catch me on social media at Jono himself, Jono, and my podcasts are Putting in Work, which is an interview show similar to this, talking to creative people. And of course, I mentioned a lot of the Last Stand crew have been on there before. Also, Comedy Rewind is a podcast. Dagon's been on that one. It's a rewatch show talking about 90s and 2000s comedies of yesteryear, how they hold up under the 2021 microscope.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, keep it up. You have a cool, like, you've really been at this for so long. It's funny to think about, like, you've really stuck with it. I think that's another thing people need to learn out there, is like, if you want to create it, being sticky with it is really important if you want to even see if you can sink or swim. And you've really been like a metronome, and I've noticed that. And I think it's great. It's awesome. Yeah. So yeah, keep up the good work, and thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of Sacred Symbols Plus, Last Stand Media. Of course, your support here on Patreon, could not do it without you. We hope you continue to enjoy these shows. Keep the feedback coming. We'll see you next time for more everything. Until then, goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show was conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.